The courtroom in downtown Chicago, Illinois, was heavy with tension. The air conditioning hummed softly, but it did little to cool the heat of injustice that lingered in the room. Marcus Reed, 18 years old, sat at the defendant's table, his wrists still marked from the too tight handcuffs. Across from him, Judge Harold Kensington adjusted his glasses, already looking bored. "Let's make this quick. I have better things to do," he muttered, tapping his gavel against the desk. The spectators whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with judgment. To them, Marcus was just another black kid from the South Side, just another case, another name on the docket. The prosecutor, Richard Holloway, smirked as he straightened his suit. He had won cases like this 100 times before. Marcus, however, wasn't like the others. He didn't shrink in fear. He didn't plead for mercy. Instead, he sat up straight, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes filled with something far more dangerous than fear, rage. The truth was on his side. The question was, would anyone care to hear it? The courtroom was against him. Marcus could feel it in the judge's lazy indifference, in the prosecutor's smug confidence, in the way the bailiff didn't even bother hiding his smirk. They thought they already knew how this would end. Another poor black kid caught in the system, another open and shut case. But Marcus wasn't just another defendant. As Holloway rose from his seat, he adjusted his tie with the air of a man who had done this 1,000 times. His voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Marcus Reed was caught in possession of a stolen Dodge Charger, fleeing from police. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The evidence is clear." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Judge Kensington sighed, rubbing his temple. "Sounds straightforward to me," he muttered, barely glancing at Marcus. Marcus clenched his fists beneath the table, but his expression remained unreadable. He knew the game they were playing. He just had to play it better. When the judge turned to his public defender, a nervous woman who had barely spoken since the hearing began, Marcus saw his chance. Before she could open her mouth, he placed a steady hand on her arm, a silent request. She hesitated, then slowly sat back down. The room stilled. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice calm but razor-sharp, "I'll be representing myself." Laughter rippled through the courtroom, mocking, dismissive. Judge Kensington leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow. "You'll what?" Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I'll be defending myself." The laughter died. Because suddenly this wasn't just another case anymore. Silence filled the courtroom, thick and suffocating. The laughter had faded, replaced by something else, unease. Marcus held his ground, his hands steady at his sides. He could feel the weight of every gaze pressing against him. Judge Kensington's condescending amusement, Holloway's thinly veiled irritation, the quiet disbelief of the jury. They weren't taking him seriously. Not yet. "Fine," Kensington sighed, tapping his gavel against the desk. "Let's hear what you have to say, Mr. Reed. But I suggest you don't waste our time." Marcus nodded, stepping forward. His voice was clear, his words deliberate. "Prosecution claims I was caught fleeing in the stolen Charger. That Officer Wyatt personally saw me behind the wheel." He turned to Holloway, eyes sharp. "That's what you said, right?" The prosecutor smirked. "That's correct." Marcus tilted his head slightly. "And that's written in Wyatt's report?" "It is." A slow smile touched Marcus's lips. "Then let's pull the officer's GPS logs." The shift was immediate. Holloway's smirk faltered, his fingers tightening around the papers in front of him. Marcus took another step forward. "Because if we do, we'll see that Officer Wyatt wasn't even on duty at the time of the chase." "Which means his testimony?" He shrugged. "Completely unreliable." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Kensington leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Mr. Holloway, do you object to verifying those records?" The prosecutor hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was everything. For the first time, Marcus wasn't the one on trial. The system was. The weight of the moment pressed down on the courtroom like a storm rolling in. No one was laughing now. Marcus let the silence stretch, watching the tension coil tighter. Holloway shifted uncomfortably, his once polished confidence cracking. He knew. He knew he'd lost control of the narrative. Finally, the prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains." Marcus cut him off. "Let's talk about facts." He turned to the jury, meeting each of their gazes. "The prosecution claims my fingerprints on the steering wheel prove I stole the car." His voice was steady, but there was fire beneath it. Righteous. Unshaken. "But let's think logically. If you try on a jacket in a store, then walk away and later someone steals it, Do your fingerprints mean you committed the crime? A ripple of uncertainty spread through the jury box. A few exchanged glances. This car was left running outside a gas station. I touched it. But that doesn't mean I stole it. Marcus took a step forward, his presence commanding. And you know who could confirm that? He lifted a paper from his file. The car's owner, Raymond Whitaker. His statement, somehow missing from the prosecution's filings, clearly says the person he saw taking his car was white. The reaction was immediate. A collective gasp. Disbelief. Holloway scrambled. Your Honor. Marcus held up a hand. No need. This case isn't about facts anymore, is it? Judge Kensington exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. The case wasn't unraveling. It was collapsing. The gavel's echo faded, but the weight of Judge Kensington's words lingered in the air. Case dismissed. For a moment, the courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence. Then chaos. The gallery erupted with whispers, gasps, and hurried scribbles from reporters who suddenly realized they were witnessing something far bigger than an ordinary trial. Marcus didn't move. He stood still, his hands in his pockets, letting the reality of the moment settle. He had done it. He had unraveled a case built on assumptions, on bias, on a system that had never expected him to fight back. Judge Kensington, still gripping his gavel, studied Marcus with an unreadable expression. Regret? Respect? Recognition? It didn't matter. Marcus had forced the system to look at itself, and for once it had blinked first. As he turned to leave, the judge's voice stopped him. Mr. Carter. Marcus hesitated but didn't turn around. Pause. Then, softer than before, you should consider law school. A smirk tugged at Marcus's lips. He didn't need to consider it. He already knew. Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Marcus, did you know the case would be dismissed? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? He ignored them. This wasn't about proving he was smart. It was about something bigger. At the bottom of the steps, his mother stood waiting. Arms crossed, face unreadable. Then, a sigh, a shake of the head, and finally, a tight hug. You scared me half to death. Marcus chuckled. Had to take a risk, Ma? And this was just the beginning. As Marcus stepped away from the flashing cameras and the roaring crowd, a different kind of weight settled on his shoulders. He had won, but at what cost? This wasn't just about proving his innocence. This was about exposing the cracks in a system that had nearly swallowed him whole. How many others had been crushed under the same weight, without the knowledge or voice to fight back? Across the street, standing by his sleek black sedan, Judge Kensington lingered, watching. The arrogance that had dripped from his words at the start of the trial was gone. His gaze now held something else, a quiet reckoning, a reluctant acknowledgement that he had misjudged Marcus, just as he had misjudged so many before him. Marcus met his gaze, then turned back to his mother, whose grip on his arm had tightened. Let's go home, she said softly. Home. The word felt different now. Marcus knew this wasn't over. He couldn't just go back to life as it was, not after this. Not after seeing firsthand how easily someone could be buried under bad police work, lazy prosecution, and a judge more concerned with his afternoon tea time than a young man's future. As they walked to the car, a reporter shouted one last question. Marcus, what's next for you? He didn't stop. He didn't need to. He already knew the answer. This wouldn't be the last courtroom he stood in, but next time he wouldn't be the defendant. He'd be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be the only one. 1 year later. The courtroom felt different this time. Marcus wasn't standing at the defendant's table, fighting for his freedom. He was standing at the prosecution's table, fighting for justice. The weight of his first real case pressed on his shoulders, but it didn't shake him. If anything, it fueled him. Judge Kensington sat on the bench, watching Marcus with an unreadable expression. The same judge who once dismissed him as just another troubled kid was now forced to acknowledge him as an equal. The case was clear. An innocent man, a wrongful arrest, a prosecution built on shaky evidence. It was déjà vu, but this time, Marcus wasn't the one on trial. He had spent the last year working relentlessly, studying law with a passion sharpened by his own experience. And now he was here, not just to win a case but to make a statement. He turned toward the jury, his voice steady, unwavering. We've seen this before. We know how easy it is for the system to assume guilt rather than prove it. But today you have the power to make sure justice isn't just a word we throw around, it's a reality. Silence hung in the air. Judge Kensington tapped his gavel. Proceed. As Marcus stepped forward, he caught a glimpse of his mother in the gallery. Pride shone in her eyes. She had always believed in him even when the world didn't. This wasn't just about one case. This was about changing the system from the inside. And Marcus wasn't going to stop until he did. A new beginning. As Marcus stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the past year settled on him. This wasn't just another victory, it was proof that he belonged here. The sun hung low over the city, casting long shadows across the steps where reporters swarmed, their microphones thrust forward like weapons. Marcus, how does it feel to win your first case? What's next for you? Do you think the justice system is changing? He ignored most of the questions, his focus elsewhere. Across the street, Judge Kensington stood by his car, watching. There was no smirk this time, no condescension, just something closer to respect. Marcus's mother was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. She didn't say anything at first. Just like that day a year ago, she simply looked at him, searching his face. Then finally she nodded. "You did good, baby." Marcus exhaled, a slow, steady breath. This was only the beginning. There were still too many wrongfully accused, too many cases built on bias rather than truth. He wasn't just here to win, he was here to change the game. And he was just getting started. The lesson behind the fight for justice. Marcus's story is more than just a courtroom drama, it's a wake-up call. How many people have been convicted not because of solid evidence, but because of bias, rushed investigations, or a system that prioritizes convenience over truth? His case reminds us that justice isn't automatic, it's something we have to fight for. The lesson here is clear. Never accept things at face value, especially when lives and futures are at stake. If Marcus hadn't questioned the so-called solid evidence, he would have been another statistic, another victim of an unfair system. This applies beyond the courtroom. Whether in our workplaces, communities, or personal lives, we must challenge injustice when we see it. Speak up, educate yourself, and never let someone else's assumptions define your fate. The world doesn't change on its own, we have to make it change. Thank you for watching the video. Please comment with number 1 to let me know you have watched the whole video. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to always receive new videos as soon as possible.